Haberfeld with more to the story, Maki and Ed Mullins. I'm standing today for Ed, who is in the field, and I have amazing guests who gracefully are joining us, Phil McCabe and Louis Anemone, and they're going to start our podcast talking about what the Rome is burning, and Rome right now is New York City. So Phil, first to you.
Hi, everybody. I'm one of the producers here. I'm filling in for Ed today. But I'm former sergeant from NYPD. My last command was the Disorder Control Unit, where we dealt with the subject that we're going to be dealing with today. I'd like to introduce Chief Louis Anemone, the former chief of the New York City Police Department. Can't get no higher. He is also the person that was tasked with improving and revising the way we dealt with the situation that we're facing here today, which he did in the 90s, which resulted in the Disorder Control Unit, which I became a member of after he moved on to Chief of Patrol. So welcome, Chief. It's good to see you again.
Thanks, and good morning.
You know, thinking about you a lot these days.
Yeah, I
remembering things. So what's your take on all this? I mean,
all right, so let me. Can I speak for a few minutes then?
Yeah, yes, by all means.
Okay. So let's start with just I think the general. I'm sure you all join me in this. We condemn the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis. I want to get that out there, and if my knees allowed me, I'd do what Ed Delatorre and Jeff Madry did yesterday in Brooklyn and take a knee for that poor fella who died due to unjust violence by the police in Minneapolis. Having said that, I also like to say that I've seen this movie that's running now in New York, Philadelphia, Los Angeles, Minneapolis. I've seen this movie before, and I know the ending. Phil, you've seen this movie before,
yes.
And you know the ending as well.
Yes.
So we know things have to be different. We know we have to do some things different. What exactly is well, we spent a lot of time and effort and training, thousands of hours of training to put together guidelines for how to handle disorder control situations. They've been included now in the New York City Police Department's patrol guide. They are law for the police. We've got to make use of that, number one. Number two, we've got loads of equipment and units that haven't even begun to enter this disturbance to assist with the policing of this disturbance. I think that the leadership of the state, the leadership of the city is greatly at fault. When I don't see the mounted unit taking part in anti-riot demonstrations, when I don't see the highway patrol 50 strong in wedge formations not taking part, I say this is a political decision that's been imposed on the police department. So our leadership in the city now, police leadership anyway, is trying to fight this with one hand tied behind their back. This idea of letting people vent, even though they have a righteous cause to demonstrate, but to have them vent and uncontrolled demonstrations that turn into riots is preposterous. It's dangerous to the public, it's dangerous to the rioters, and it's dangerous to the police who are supposed to be there trying to help. In this instance, Maki, I know much of the police literature these days says, you know, you can't arrest your way out of crime. In the area of disorder control and riot control, not only can you arrest your way out, you must arrest your way out of the disorder. That's how you end a riot. No ifs, no ands, no buts. So, our history in New York City, I've heard the commissioner and I've heard Chief Monahan expound it very well. We've handled demonstrations, safe demonstrations, not so safe demonstrations, and we've handled riots in the past. We know how to do it. They know how to do it. They need to be given the authority to do what has to be done. So, a couple of other points here that I'd like to, when we deal generally with a group that wants to redress a grievance or protest a policy of government or anything else, we usually like to sit down, and they usually like to do it as well, with the police ahead of time. We go over the guidelines. They'll ask questions and we'll give answers. We'll talk about things like the size of the crowd. Will you provide marshals for your group? So they work as go-betweens so that the police don't have to be right up on top of people. They have their own marshals clearly identified who pass on the orders of the police to the group. We agree on a route of the group, the route that they're going to take, so that we can do sufficient traffic control and the general public isn't endangered or inconvenienced. This is all done ahead of time, and these things work like clockwork. These groups, from what I can see, are not doing that. They're not sitting down. They're not looking to protect the public. I don't know what their message is, but it certainly has nothing to do with George Floyd. When I see them running out of sneaker stores or high-end stores on Spring Street or Worcester Street in the Soho neighborhood, what does that have to do with George Floyd? So, and now you add to this lack of the organization and lack of the meeting. These are all ideas that are designed to make for a safe demonstration where your point can be made clearly and safely. Instead, we now have groups showing up at night, unorganized, with no prior meeting with the police. And we all know, Phil, you've seen this and I've seen this. When nighttime occurs, everything changes. This group of, the governor calls them protesters, become a mob. And then the mob becomes a riot. That's basically the ABCs of what has to be done. The other thing that the political establishment, the mere fact that they're out there now in groups violates the public health law, violates the state's executive orders during the pandemic. This is crazy to allow this to happen at night. And then during the day, it's bad enough, but at night, it's a prima facie case of unlawful assembly. There are laws on the books that should be enforced. And basically, I'd like to turn it over to anyone who has a question or anyone else wants a comment.
Yeah, thank you very much for your comments and opening statements. I think it cannot be stated any better. And there are a number of issues I think that we need to grapple with and discuss. And I will start actually with the last one. You cannot call on people to keep social distance, right, when it comes to the pandemic, and then say, okay, I am all for these demonstrations, I am with the protesters. You cannot do that. I mean, it's not about the cause. And again, as you stated, we all feel horrible about what happened to George Floyd. I was one of the first who commented on this in national media saying, I've never seen a technique like this. It's not a legitimate technique. So we are past this in terms of making sure that everybody knows that we condemn it, and this is not about us arguing about whether or not it was legitimate. It was not. But what's happening right now in New York City, what's happening around the country is absolute violation of things that we were told to do for the past 3 months. Keep the social distance, stay at home, protect the people. 100,000 people died out there. 100,000 people died out there, and suddenly, because there is a cause, and again, I am not questioning the cause, but does this cause justify putting people's lives in danger right now because they violate the social distances? Absolutely not.
Crazy.
But again, the politicians seem to have the double standard. When it comes to pandemic, we all need to adhere to certain rules and regulations and whatever ideas they might have about our safety when it comes to this particular case of protesting out there, everything out the window. So definitely police forces around the country are getting now a mixed message, right? Do we need to enforce the social distance? Is everything still in jeopardy? Or everything back to normal? And then people can congregate in hundreds and thousands, and we have to stand in front of them and endanger ourselves, right? On the part of the police. Now, the police are exposed to the virus. Forget all this, not forget, but putting aside all this violence against the police that makes me sick to my stomach. I mean, I just cannot see this. I cannot hear the politicians saying, you know, we provided de-escalation training and the police officers are trained to endure this. Nobody should be trained to endure urine thrown in their face, Molotov cocktails thrown in their face, breaking the windows of patrol cars. No, this is not about de-escalation right now. This is about violent, murderous attacks on police officers in New York City, around the country. And I just cannot listen to these excuses that there are a couple of people here and a couple of people there, but the majority are peaceful. I don't see this peaceful majority. I don't see it.
No, it just seems, it seems right from the get-go, and by that I mean Minneapolis. Yes, what he did to that guy was dead wrong. I haven't met a cop yet that agrees with it whatsoever, and they're right. It's just wrong. But from the get-go, Chief, I think what happened here was Minneapolis didn't drop the ball. I mean, there was no, they didn't follow the principles, at least that we have. I don't know if they have a copy of our book, but you know, rapidly mobilize, contain and isolate, secure all the locations, arrest violators. I mean, they just didn't seem to do it. And then Giuliani said it last night on the news. Once they gave up that precinct, that really set a bad precedent that has now had a ripple effect. I mean, this is ridiculous. Yeah. Going up like crazy. And you're right, it doesn't seem like they're taking the action that we would have took back in the day, so to speak. And by that, I mean a controlled, disciplined effort to stop the circumstances when they become wrong, when it's not peaceful. I'm not talking about, you know, way back in the day.
And I think
trained to do it.
Yeah, I think that it's very clear that none of us is saying that peaceful demonstrations are not something that people are entitled to. We all agree with this and we're all for this. But what's happening, as I said, I don't see this being peaceful at all. And, you know, I don't know, you probably have seen the mob in Atlanta attacking the CNN building out of all the buildings. I don't, you know, it just shows the CNN is actually usually very anti-police. So if they were to pick up a target, I think they missed the target. But you could see this one guy with a skateboard coming and trying to smash the windows of the building, and the police just standing there and looking at this. This is not policing. You know, Chief, you said that the NYPD now tries to control it with one hand behind its back. I would say both hands behind the back. I mean, it's because cops are just standing there passively and looking at all this violence. And I'm thinking about long-term effects of this, because when you are told to de-escalate, when active violence is perpetrated against you as police officers, when people are looting, as you said, I also, for the life of me, don't see the correlation between designer sneakers, looting, and, you know, and the memory of George Floyd. On the contrary, I think it actually takes away from the cause and takes away from anything that legitimate groups want to achieve. But at this point, you cannot differentiate between the legitimate and the mob, because in a way, the legitimate seem to protect the mob. I don't see any protesters grabbing the violent individuals and handing them over to the police. They sort of protect them. So to me, you might have started, you know, for all the right reasons, but when you protect the criminals within you, within your group, or you don't, you know, push them forward towards the police so the police can stop them, then you're as guilty as the criminals who are doing this.
So Maki, my take on this, and I respectfully would disagree, because my experience, Phil, again, if yours is different, please let me know. When we see the anarchists and the people who are determined, the criminals who are determined to do something criminal at these events, they hide among that group.
Yeah.
They get themselves in that group, perhaps sometimes in positions of leadership, at other times from the rear of the crowd. They'll start the throwing and the smashing of it's probably unfair for us to ask members who were there legitimately in the daytime looking to demonstrate, to try to police or enforce that. And the other point is, I saw something on, it must have been YouTube, in Louisville, Kentucky. A police officer got separated from his team, and the crowd was about to engulf him, and members of that demonstration locked arms and they protected him from the crowd.
Well, we know that.
I have to take my hat off to people for risking their own safety to do something like that. Did you see that?
Absolutely, I've seen that too. But again, I'm not saying it in New York City. What I'm saying in New York City is people attacking the patrol cars, people throwing bottles at the cops, people throwing, the language, the vile language that is, I mean, to me, violence against police officers is not just the physical violence. It's also the verbal violence, the level of hatred out there. I'm sorry, I've seen demonstrations around the country, around the world. I've seen people demonstrating in hundreds of thousands, and still with respect towards law enforcement.
Yeah.
And we don't see it here. We don't think, certainly in New York City. I think that part of the violence is also related to the COVID-19, because people were locked in their houses, locked in their apartments. There's a lot of anger, that was there. They lost their jobs, and so there's a level of frustration out there that adds on to the level of frustration from George Floyd case. So it's compounded at this point.
This is true. This is true. The other thing, you talk about the future. What lies ahead for the future of policing?
Good.
So I heard the mayor, I guess on Saturday, talking about how disturbed he was by what he saw, by the police actions in the street, which I thought, by the way, were justified, were restrained for the most part throughout the days and the night of Friday and Saturday. But he talked about the culture of the police. It's got to change. And he started this discussion about talking about the George Floyd killer, the policeman in Minneapolis. But then he turned it to the police culture in New York City. We've done enough, but we haven't done enough. We've got to change. We've got to change. And it's, the implication there is that this tragic loss of life in Minneapolis, he thinks that wasn't the aberration. He thinks, that there's something wrong with all of us that are in this police, that we have to change. The aberration was the action in Minneapolis.
Absolutely. I was one of the creators of the NYPD police certificate almost 20 years ago, and I still teach there, and I'm the academic director of the NYPD, and we teach ethics and we teach various types of interactions and understanding for 20 years. So for the mayor to say that this just started 6 years ago or something, I mean, NYPD has been exposed to multicultural ethics training, de-escalation training for decades. This is nothing new. And it's true. I think it's a wonderful point that you're raising, and many politicians, including Cuomo and others around the country, yes, they treat this as this is a norm. This is not a norm. This is an aberration. This is an aberration. We're not talking what happened 20 years ago, 30 years ago. No, we're not talking about the Rodney King anymore. police department in the last 2 decades, and I say this as somebody who specializes in police training and looks at police training all the time around the country, around the world, this is not the way police officers are trained now. It's not about a given politician in New York City or in another jurisdiction. It is about total change in the way police officers are trained to deal with people, that they are sworn to protect and serve, and to make it some sort of, and to place the blame on the profession in a way. Yeah. To me, it's irresponsible, because it does fuel this finger pointing, right? And blaming the profession rather than the bad apple of the profession. And there are bad apples in every profession. And certainly politicians should be aware of the bad apples in their profession, right?
This is so true.
But this is the case. Show me a profession that doesn't have bad apples, whether medical doctors or accountants or lawyers. You know, we have quite a few lawyers recently sentenced, you know, to prison for various types of misconduct. We have almost 1 million cops around this country, 18,000 police agencies. Yes, there are various examples of police misconduct that they are, you know, pointing to right now, but we have hundreds of thousands of calls for service, right? Around the country, so many interactions.
Millions of calls.
Yeah, so
millions of interactions.
Yeah, they blow up the small part of it, and they turn it into their agenda or whatever their gain, what they're looking to do and stuff. But if you really look at all the numbers and things, we're not as bad as what they're saying. Yes, we got bad guys. This guy was a piece of crap, obviously. And it's just, you know, somebody should have said something, the whole 9 yards, and it's tragic. And the effect it's having, you talk about the future. What are the cops going to do when this is all over and they have to arrest somebody and they resist? I mean, no matter what they do, it's already started. It started after Ferguson, but now it's going to be even more. But they're just gonna. I mean, I think you're going to see a mass retirement in New York City. I think anybody who's eligible.
Not just New York City. I think, you know, and I've been talking about this for decades now. We have to start looking at recruitment and selection. Training is sort of the third part of the equation, but who do we recruit? Who do we select, right? Is it just about race? It is just about looking at the community that you police, or it's about other characteristics that we need to look at? We have to stop measuring people, you know, qualifying people based on how many push-ups they can do in a minute, right? Or how fast they can run a mile. This is not a profession about how many push-ups or how fast you run a mile. This is about maturity, understanding, emotional intelligence. These are things that develop in people only in their late 20s.
And Maki,
we have to start looking at this, and this is an opportunity to start looking at our standards for recruitment. And instead, we are focusing on training and de-escalation. Training is very important. I'm the first one to say, but as number 3, not number 1. Not number 2, number 3. Look at the recruitment, look at the selection, then start with training. You can have the best training on earth. If you offer it to the wrong person, it's not going to work. People, you know, need the police. They need professional police. They need respect for the police. They need to be compliant. They're not going to be respectful and compliant if the politicians are constantly throwing the cops under the bus. And this is what's happening right now. On one hand, they say, we will not stand for, you know, all this violent behavior against the cops. And at the same time, they say, but we are much better. Yes, but we are much better. We are much better. The culture is better. First of all, I don't know how much Mayor de Blasio understands about police culture. You know, to talk about police culture, it takes a professional who understands policing and not a politician to talk about police culture. When I was a student, I mentioned it on one of the podcasts, when I was a doctoral student at John Jay, I had a course titled Professional Policing many years ago, and it was taught by an anthropologist, a very famous female anthropologist. And she was saying things that for me back then as a police officer didn't resonate as true. And one day I just said to her, listen, you know, you're an anthropologist, and anthropologists have the tendency to say that you don't have to be a member of the tribe to study the tribe. You can just observe the tribe from outside and understand. Maybe it's true about tribes, but it's not true about police profession. Unless you have been a police officer, you understand the dynamics, you understand the dangers that police officers are exposed to on a daily basis, whether it's physical or verbal, or even your own self-deprecation because of the way things evolve. You will never understand policing or police subculture. So I really resent the notion of politicians talking about police subculture.
That's why we're doing this. That's why it's called More to the Story, because we have a different perspective on all of this. We become police officers, and then we go to the scenes of different things, and we realize, wait a minute, that's not what I've always been taught, told, saw on TV, etc. I mean, how many people have told me, you know, I know what I'm doing here because I watch Kojak. I mean, it's ridiculous. But Chief, what do you think? What do you think of what you've seen on things like the tactics? And you mentioned equipment. I remember having a garage full of equipment up in the Bronx, and I only, I think it was like the third or fourth night when I started seeing shields and stuff.
Yeah.
Even the first couple of nights, I didn't see too many helmets on people's head. And as you remember, there was always resistance about putting helmets on by politicians and certain supervisors.
You're absolutely right, Phil. But those are good observations. I saw the same thing. So listen, specifically with the Brooklyn nighttime thing at the Barclays Center. So Friday night, Saturday night, they had intelligence about the strong potential for violence at that location, or from the groups that were forming at that location. Absolutely, shields should have been visible, helmets on every head, riot sticks or batons, whatever they had, should have been out there.
Right.
Plus, you know, and I know, we have an arsenal of stuff that it's got to be displayed, if not used. It's got to be out there. It's a very real deterrent when it's seen.
Yeah, definitely. We have the different sizes of pepper spray, you know,
yes.
The family size, the industrial size. And at one point, we actually had a couple of former flamethrowers that we filled up with this stuff. We never used them.
We had a fire truck that we.
Yes, I was just going to say. I was just going to say, on the internet there is numerous requests for us to bring back the fire truck that we had. Yes, I remember it well.
The other thing that I think is lacking here, Phil and Maki, it's not really on the police end, but you know, to your point, Maki, about, you know, an anthropologist really can't talk to police about what it's like. So I see a profession where we take it for second nature that there are going to be times when we come across people who don't obey lawful orders. There are times when we're going to come across people who are engaged in criminal activity and they refuse to stop. And we're going to chase those people, we're going to capture those people, but that all involves, and we recognize it, the laying on of hands. It seems to me now that the public has somehow been taught something different. Maybe the media, maybe the politicians, that a policeman or policewoman to put her or his hands on someone, already, you know, you're in the wrong. And that's not the right attitude. You've got to give the policeman the benefit of the doubt, certainly, but in a nighttime environment with dangerous crowds, where your life is very certainly at risk at times, throwing Molotov cocktails and bricks, and they don't want you to lay hands on anyone. How are you going to do this job? This is a fundamental piece of the job. We're there because some people don't obey laws, and we have to grab them.
Yeah,
it's justifiable.
Justifiable necessary force. Necessary being the key word.
Yeah,
necessary. But what we know is legal from our perspective, the public doesn't. They
yeah.
understand they don't know the law. Most of them, they don't understand the rules and that sort of thing. So they perceive it the wrong way, and they're also encouraged. Like you said, the politicians are encouraging, the news channels are encouraging. So it's just, it's a conflict of perspectives. And again, when you become a cop, all of a sudden you see the flip there. You see the different sides of things.
I love to hear the talking heads, criticizing or critiquing police actions when they've never been surrounded by a mob. They've never been at a demonstration with bricks and bottles and.
And even before I worked for you, I was surrounded on 42nd Street.
There you go.
Rest, I know how it feels. It can, and everybody doesn't understand that. We're pretty good at what we do, but we're not Superman.
Yeah, and here's the other thing, Phil. Phil and Maki. We know this from years of training. We are a cross section of society. The police department.
Yes.
The way Maki talked about politicians and lawyers who are corrupt and evil. We have people in this profession, over 800,000, but there are people in there who don't belong in this profession. We have bad apples.
Yes.
We recognize this. The public has to recognize this too. We are not gods. We are not Caesar's wife. We try to be. We try to be the best we can. They all do. But we're going to come across, and they have to be prepared for mistakes by well-meaning police officers and criminal actions by evil police officers. But the answer can't be what we're seeing now, riots in the street.
And and I will put my academic hat for a moment, because this goes back to some academic concept like the moral panic theory, right? It's suddenly the entire country is this moral panic against law enforcement and perceiving law enforcement as this major evil in this country. But the truth is that the media outlets are shaping this moral panic. Because I have to tell you that I was asked for a number of comments on this, on what happened, and some of what I said was published. But the other stuff that I said was not, because I could feel when the producers or the journalists would interview me that I was not saying what they wanted me to say, right? I was saying things that related more to the future of policing and in general, talking about what happened there with George Floyd, that everybody should be concerned that it's not just an issue of race, that it's an issue of professional policing, which is the pillar of democracy, and we should all be concerned because if a police officer can do it to one person, he or she can do it to another. So we have to take it a little bit outside this focus on just race relations. It never sees the light of the day because they want to.
Yeah, well, I'm sure that happened to you too, Chief. Some of your interviews and press conferences and stuff where they cut the clip, they cut it to their satisfaction, to whatever the boss's agenda was at whatever news media it is, and we see that constantly. Again, more to the story. I mean,
right. Right? We are the professionals in the field. We know what is happening, but they don't necessarily want to hear the opinions of the professionals. They hear things that will incite the public even further.
Yes, they're doing it for their own benefit. I mean, when you become a cop, especially in New York, I'll use that only because that's where I started. You pick up the paper and you read the story and you go, wait a minute, I was there. That didn't happen. Totally, it's totally twisted to whatever agenda they may have, type of stuff.
And people who are my students, not police officers, but regular students, would frequently tell me, well, it must be true because it was published in the newspaper, right? So people have this tendency to believe whatever is published out there, and they run with this, and again, they constantly show the images from the actual, I would say, murder of George Floyd, right? Because I'm comfortable saying this. Yeah. But on the other hand, they do not show, a day after it happened, when the riot started over there was an African-American business owner whose business was burned by this mob there that was rioting, and he was crying. He was crying. You know what? I would like to see this on national media played over and over and over and over. Who are they victimizing? Putting aside the police for a moment, they're victimizing members of their own communities, you know? But the media, they showed it once. We've never seen it before.
You know, I saw a public official the other night at the Barclays Center, Jumani Williams. I believe he's a public advocate.
Yes.
He was complaining not only that some of the cops were wearing helmets, he thought there were too many cops there, that the mere presence of the police was a incitement to violence by the mob. So you know, at some point, someone, I guess, one day is going to say, okay, pull all the cops out and let Mr. Williams police this group, this mob, and see how they turn out and what ends up happening in Brooklyn. Just
and also, you know,
you remember that was a struggle. That was a struggle for us to get helmets on people's heads.
Yeah.
A lot of supervisors that were against it. And I remember back at Yankee Stadium, Steinbrenner didn't want it.
Yeah.
And they tried to do it until Chief Scanlon said, nah, it's up to the cop.
Yeah.
And then they changed the rule. Then they made it to the supervisor. So, you know, the helmets has been an issue within the police department, depending upon, you know, when you were there, everybody had helmets.
Yeah.
You were right there with the horses and the motorcycles.
Yeah.
Some of the other guys didn't do that.
But also there is another issue I think that we need to address, especially in New York City now. Okay, so there were like 300 arrests or whatever number the other day. So now according to the bail reform, the new criminal justice reform, what? Are they all going to be released because they're not going to be charged with violent behavior or just the disturbance, civil disturbance or something like this?
If they're getting charged with, you know, things like the simple stuff at these incidents, such as this kind of stuff, they're being let go. It's common knowledge in New York City that if you're locked up for disorderly conduct, they let you go. It's really got to be something crazy for them to even impose any kind of fine. The last time I was in a discon court with a case, the court officers were telling me, yeah, this guy lets everybody non-guilty. And that's going back a lot of years. But we know that. Now, one of the practices we used to use was if we did lock people up, we transported them to somewhere a little bit more distance and processed them there. Some people are entitled to a ticket. Some people are entitled to a desk appearance ticket. Some people are entitled to go through the system, depending upon whatever the legalities are at the time and the charges. But we would take them in the distance because that would keep them away from the crowd. Because once they get these tickets, they're going back. Everybody doesn't realize when we have incidents like that, people come from all over. Now we're having anarchists coming from out of town, which, you know, I think this whole situation is somewhat too coordinated and too organized on a national scale for there not to be something behind all this. But that's just me. But they're organized and they train just like we did. I had film from CNN from years ago where they're training how to deal with the police, how to deal with the horses, how to deal with pepper spray. I used it for our training. I told the cops, if you know vinegar, that either they're going to do something or they think we're going to do something that's going to involve pepper spray, because vinegar on bandanas was a field expedient gas man for them. And you know, don't wear your contacts and stuff like that. So they're training just like we're training for this sort of thing. And I'm a little curious how much training is still going on our job at this point. I mean, I used to wake up at night screaming form a line, form a wedge, because I did it much. But in my Boy Scout troop did the line too. But we did a lot of training. We trained thousands and thousands of rookies on top of the special units and stuff.
So this new bail law, though,
that too, yeah.
Even for more serious charges, Phil, I think they're letting them out.
Yes, yes.
So if you would remember, besides moving these people that we arrested, Maki, to another borough for processing, it was my approach to this is that they weren't the first thing on our agenda. Our first agenda was secure them, but let's police the street and let's make sure that we don't have any more violence. When all of that is done to my satisfaction, then we might send 1 or 2 officers to process the 6, 7, 8, 900, 1,000 arrests. And it would take as long as it would take, particularly if they were going to get a desk appearance ticket or a summons. But there's no rush to get them back out on the street. There should never be a rush to get them back out on the street where they can now enter the fray again and embolden more people.
I'm a big believer in deterrence, both personal, individual deterrence and general deterrence. I mean, you know, this is not just a theory. From the personal, individual deterrence, if you arrest somebody and that person is not back on the street, well, you prevented that person from committing crimes. I'm sorry, that's, you know, this is undisputable. No matter what kind of statistics are out there. If you are behind bars, you're not committing crimes on the street, right? So that works. But just to the point that Phil mentioned, and you also talked about this, Chief, about the not having the expectation from people to push out the instigators up front and to separate them. I want to pick it up again because, you know, the politicians have said, oh, these are people who are from outside and they come here and you know, and they are not representing really the larger crowds and they have different agendas. But you said they hide in the crowd, but they are in this crowd. So, I mean, they are in this crowd. This crowd gives them protection whether consciously or subconsciously. And if you are a person who is truly involved in this cause, who truly wants justice to be different towards various groups in the society, whether it's race related or social economic status related, you should also be conscious about who you are fighting with, right? You cannot fight for a cause with criminals around you and with you up front. And this is the case again in that I mentioned in Atlanta, that this thug, I cannot even come up with a better word, was with the skateboard, was trying to break the glass. And the people outside who were standing next to him, at a certain point, his hand got cut. So they were trying to wrap his hand. So it's not that innocent that people have zero, you know, ability to step up and say, no, you're not going to do this. I mean, people have to have this civil responsibility to stop criminals amongst them. They do.
I can't argue with you. I really can't argue with you. That's a very, very good argument. You know, the other tactic, Phil, I don't know if we've seen it. I certainly haven't seen it on any of the videos I was watching or the newscasts. Sometimes we put plainclothesmen in the rear of the crowd to identify and arrest the people throwing the bottles, the bricks, the Molotov cocktails. I don't know if they're doing any of that.
I'm not sure if they're able anymore. I think, I know I was involved in a many lawsuits where they were investigating just that fact. I'm not sure what the legality of it is as far as, you know, whether it's hand shoe or something like that. So they may have gotten away from it. But yes, I remember that. You had that in there, and you had the plainclothes in there watching with the, you know, and identifying those things, you know, and they pointing them out. There's the guy, and the arrest teams would come in and scoop them up. But you know, they were really challenging that a lot. So they may have backed off on that. But
how about this idea of taking weapons away from them before they start marching?
Exactly. And to Maki's point, not for nothing, but Bernie Kerik said it also on the news last night. He says, you know, once you start lighting fires or throwing stuff, it's end of story. Everybody off the street, not just you can't, you know, who's peaceful and who's not. So the peaceful people should realize that once these idiots do something, you're losing your platform there, because everybody has to go. We can't make the determination who's who at that point. And the other thing, and again, to be fair, I don't know what's going on as far as resources and as far as direction is concerned in New York City and everywhere else. But you know, we're up to what, 45 RMPs on fire, RMPs for everybody, our police cars. You know, after the first one, it should have been it. I mean, they're throwing firebombs at us. If you recall, we gave our task forces Namex suits and when they deployed, you know, I mean, they got away from that money-wise and all of that, but they just for that reason, because you studied how it was done in other countries, like with the hooligan situation and at soccer games and stuff like that. And you know, and you do have equipment. Another thing I haven't seen out there is pepper ball guns. I don't know if we still have them anymore. You know, we developed a pepper ball program and everything. And for everybody that doesn't know what that is, it's a paintball gun. And instead of paint, it's pepper powder or pepper liquid. You know, it's a non-lethal type of weapon that's used, and it's been effective in other places. I see other jobs are using rubber bullets, but I don't think we've ever had those. But there is some of the equipment. You know, they got away from the netting for the vehicles.
Yeah,
Used to have where the vehicles kind of grew out of them, as I recall, because we went to different style of cars and they had to be redone and everything like that. So stuff.
As we're wrapping it up, I would like to ask each one of you just to sum it up for the cops out there. You know, we want to send them some message of support, but also ideas how to stay safe. So if each one of you can say a few words, and then I will wrap it up.
so if I can just say, I want to God bless the men and women of the NYPD and all law enforcement departments across this country during this particular time of stress and strain and craziness. Stand tall, keep your heads high, and never back down. For the individual sergeants, lieutenants, and police officers that are on the line, hold the line, think team, act as a team, don't get cut off, don't take independent action. Work as a team. That's the safest way to handle this. Yes. Keep your head on swivel, watching your 6, your 12, your 3, and your 9 at all times.
And up to.
Phil?
Just for all the brothers and sisters out there, please watch your back, stay safe. I give you a hell of a lot of credit because I'm from a different time. Just putting up with day-to-day things that you're dealing with now, especially in New York City, is amazing. And to deal with this is the most I've ever seen it. I think it's the most the chief has ever seen it. And he was there in the 60s and stuff when it got bad. And it's just watch your back, do everything he just said. Look, keep your head on the swivel. It's the stuff we taught in training all the time. Those words were constantly repeated. Watch the roofs. Just watch your back and work as a team. Don't go off on your own and stuff. But please be careful. Please stay safe, and you know, just keep your head about you and stuff. So be careful out there.
Thank you. I just want to sum up our lively discussions, and thank you very much for the participation. You know, again, putting for a second the academic hat and then going back to the practitioner hat. You know, Egon Bittner, who was one of the most profound scholars of policing and studied the whole notion of use of force on general, why do we have police? He said years, decades ago, why do we have police? Because something is happening about which something ought to be done right now, meaning bad things are happening, something needs to be done about this right now, and who is going to do this? Not the civilians, the police. Yep. So as you have said to the police officers in New York City, around New York State, around the country, we are proud of you. We hold your lives dear. We are amazed. We all are from a different generation, the three of us. I wouldn't be able to just stand peacefully and see somebody showing me the middle finger and then screaming at me and throwing bottles of urine. I'm sorry, it wouldn't work well for that person. I am amazed by the level of professionalism that is displayed by police forces around the country. Yes, here and there are behaviors that we should not be seeing, but again, I challenge anybody and everybody who is this Monday morning quarterback, criticizing the police behavior. I challenge them to stand in front of a mob, violent mob, and behave by the book, behave by the SOPs, behave by the guidelines. Well, I bow to you. I thank you for listening, and we want you to know that we are here with you in heart and soul, and thank you from all of us.